Chapter 24 is on the origin of species, or speciation. In the first chapter, we talked about the history of evolutionary thought. Whoops, sorry about that. The history of evolutionary thought with Charles Darwin. Okay, so his theory was natural selection, essentially. Microevolution is what we've talked about with Hardy Weinberg and everything, that adaptations that evolve within a population. Okay, so color changes and things like that. Macroevolution is what this chapter is about, and here's where the crux of the argument about evolution is. So let's look at how we could get evolutionary change above a species. Okay, in other words, if we're talking about within a species, okay, dogs, different breeds of dogs are not macroevolution, that's microevolution. And we'll talk about why that is in a second. First thing you have to understand, and we're going to skip this slide for now, the first thing you're going to have to understand is the biological species concept. Biological species concept is basically that members of a biological species are reproductively compatible, or potentially. They cannot interbreed with other populations / species. So a cat or a lion and a tiger are different species, while a German Shepherd and a Great Dane are not. So sometimes different species are very similar with each other. Sometimes the same species is very different from each other. Okay, now why is this a single species and why are these two different species? Well, let's take a look at that. The key to species is something called reproductive isolation. The existence of barriers, biological barriers that keep two species from producing hybrids. If you can produce a hybrid, you are the same species, essentially. Okay, and there are two kinds of barriers: pre-zygotic, before the egg and sperm meet, and post-zygotic, after. You need to know these. Pre-zygotic barriers, there are 5. Habitat isolation. In other words, they don't live together. They live in different places. Temporal. They breed at different times of the year. So 2 species of frog, one frog breeds in May, the other frog breeds in July. Behavioral isolation. In other words, courtship rituals in geese, or other courtship rituals in birds and insects. Not like in humans where, man, I don't like the way that kid acts, so we're not going to interbreed. That's a little bit odd, but in animals, behavioral isolation is that they have certain behaviors they have to do in order to mate with each other, and if they don't have it, they don't breed. Mechanical isolation. The parts don't fit. One good example of this is with spiders. When I did my research on spiders, on the abdomen of the female is a reproductive organ, and the male actually has like something that looks like kind of like a leg that sticks off of his face that fits in there, and the female reproductive organs, if I blow this up, can be very, very intricate, something like that. And so the male's reproductive organ would have to fit that like a lock and key, kind of like an enzyme and an substrate. And sometimes, you have 2 spiders that look very much alike, but if the parts don't fit, they can't interbreed. The last one is gametic isolation. In other words, the egg and sperm won't combine. Egg and sperm won't combine. Here's a slide of the same idea. Okay? We have 2 different species, we think. Do they live together? No, they don't interbreed. Do they do it at the same time? No. Do they have the same behaviors? No. If any of these are no, they're different species because they won't mate. maybe that'll work, and maybe they attempt to mate, but the parts don't fit. Then they're not the same species. Or maybe they attempt to breed and the gametes don't work together. Then they don't make offspring. Sometimes two different species will actually have fertilization. The egg and sperm will combine. Then comes what we call post-zygotic barriers. Maybe, in many cases, the hybrids, what's called reduced hybrid viability. In other words, the babies that are actually born are really small and die at a young age, or maybe aren't born at all. Okay? So they don't have offspring. That's reduced hybrid viability. Reduced hybrid fertility. This is like a horse, this is like a mule's. Mules, horses and donkeys can breed and have mules. Mules can't have offspring. That's reduced hybrid fertility. So a mule is not a different species. Horses and donkeys are therefore different species. The last one is hybrid breakdown. This means that even though you have a viable baby, they can be fertile. They tend to die of cancers or other problems. And so we call it hybrid breakdown. They may even live long enough to maybe have an offspring, but the offspring aren't viable. And so viable means that they live and are healthy and normal. Okay? So all those are post-zygotic barriers. So anything that mates, but something of this happens, they are considered in different species. So some theories of speciation. There are two ways speciation can occur. There's allopatric speciation and sympatric speciation. Generally, what this means is allopatric means, for example, you have a pond and the middle dries up, and then you get two separate ponds. So you get two different kinds of populations of fishes in that pond. Then you get two different species. That's allopatric. You've had geographic separation. Geographic separation is allopatric. Sim means together. So in this pond we have speciation, but it happened when they lived together in the same place. Okay, and we will take a look at how that happens here in a minute. So then briefly, allopatric speciation, you've interrupted gene flow, so you've divided the population. When you divide the population, you've isolated them, they can undergo evolutionary change however long they're separated. Maybe it's been millions of years. Here's an example with ground squirrels. Two different species of ground squirrels, one on the north rim of the Grand Canyon, one on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. Obviously, this squirrel ain't going to get to that one to breed. It's a long ways down and a long ways over, unless they are world-class jumpers. Okay, here's an example of what they did is they took, experimentally, they took a population of fruit flies. They raised some flies on starch medium. In other words, that's what they ate, starch all the time. They raised other flies on maltose, a different kind of carbohydrate. And they found, after several generations of mating, that maltose males males that were bred on maltose would rather breed with females that were bred on maltose. So maybe their smell or something like that. We're not sure really why. And the opposite was true of starch males. They would rather breed with starch females. Okay, you see over here in the control group where there really wasn't any change. They mixed them up and they didn't mix them up, and it didn't seem to matter. You know, a fruit fly is a fruit fly, but somehow they could recognize where a fly was raised. Maybe the starch is the good side of the tracks or whatever. And so the fruit fly chose, more often, a female like them. Sympatric speciation, you get geographically overlapping populations. one example is something called polyploidy. Ploid refers to chromosome numbers. Okay? Polyploidy is extra sets of chromosomes due to accidents in cell division. This happens with plants specifically. So an autopolyploid is an individual with more than one chromosome set derived from one species. So for example, diploid plant, 2n number equals 6. They double their chromosomes to make 12. Here they are 6 again. Instead of dividing again in meiosis to get n, they don't. And the offspring are what are called tetraploid. And in plants, they can be viable and fertile. So you have a new species of plant, essentially. Okay, that's called polyploidy. There's also allopolyploids, which were with organisms that get them from different species. Okay, and you can look at this diagram and see the same idea. The other thing is in some kinds of fish, for example, sympatric speciation can result from new ecological niches. Now, we haven't talked about this quite yet, but a niche is kind of like the organism's job in the environment. For example, on the Galapagos Islands, 300 miles off the coast of Africa, where Darwin visited, and they're out here 300 miles off the coast of Africa. On the Galapagos Islands, there are 14 different species of finch. On the mainland area, there's pretty much one. So why are there so many different species of finch here? Well, they evolved over long periods of time to fill ecological niches. Some finches feed on big seeds. They have big bills. Some finches feed on insects. Some on fruits. Some use tools. And so the theory is that over a long period of time, maybe there was difference in environment or something like that that made it to be an advantage to be able to get big seeds. So if you had a big bill, you were selected for. Okay, some nest in the ground, some nest in trees. They have very many different jobs in the environment. In the cichlid fish from that slide, this is a picture of what they look like in normal light. These are two different species. They live together, but they won't interbreed. Probably because this fish will only pick fishes that look just like it to breed with. And this fish will only pick fishes that look just like it to breed with. So that would be sympatric speciation or sexual selection. This is the kind I want to breed with. This is the kind I want to breed with. So a review then, geographic isolation is allopatric speciation. Sympatric speciation is some kind of reproductive barrier has done it. So then one more definition, adaptive radiation is the evolution of diversely adapted species from a common ancestor upon new environmental opportunities, kind of like we talked about on the Galapagos Islands. The Hawaiian Islands are also a really interesting place to see this. So because of genetics now, we developed different models. The original model, a speciation model, was thought to be this. We had gradual change over time. That you started with this butterfly, and over time you have two different groups arise by slight changes over time. Now the model is that of punctuated equilibrium, where you get large-scale changes really fast. A large-scale change at a certain period of time due to change in environment or something else that enables new species to arise. So our original moth or original butterfly sometime long time ago, there were two branches that happened. It's one change. Let's just call this wing color. Okay, and then later on, this one also diverged again for a new change. And I'm not sure what to call this. Let's say white evolved. Okay, this is punctuated equilibrium. What you're looking at here is something called a cladogram. Oops, cladogram, in which this is time, and the separation here is one characteristic. This is a way to show how organisms are related. So one of the supports for this theory are things called homeotic genes. Homeotic genes are genes that determine where features will be when you develop. And every organism has homeotic genes. For example, there's one class of homeotic genes called Hox genes. Hox genes provide positional information in the development of fins and fish and limbs like us, or in things that walk on four legs. So the same gene, same code, same information in every living thing. That's pretty interesting. So for example, if you take an embryo of a chicken, right here is where its leg bud is growing. You will see that right in this area at the end, the Hox gene is working. It's producing a protein that's stimulating growth in that direction. In a zebrafin fish embryo, which looks very different, they have Hox genes being expressed right here where it's going to grow a fin. So support for and so if you change this gene a little bit, you can get big macroevolutionary changes. You can get very different things by just changing how this gene is expressed. So then to wrap it up, the idea of evolution is not that it's a direct link, like started here and we're going to end up with a horse, but rather over time and slow changes, mutations, things like that, the horse's evolutionary tree looks very different. There's many things along the way, sort of quote mistakes, things that didn't work out, or organisms that are extinct now that used to live here. Okay, and so the slow, small mutations over a long period of time have led to the evolution of the horse as we know it today, and every organism.